Pulang. An Indonesia episode. Pulang means to return home in Bahasa Indonesia. The mountain road above Malang was the kind of road that dropped without warning, a sudden descent into valley and forest, and the smell of wet earth and clove smoke from the villages below. Raka Wijaya had driven it in daylight before, years ago, when his company had been small enough that he still drove himself. He had not expected to be on it now at night, taking a back route on the advice of a man he would never trust again. The truck came from a side road without lights. It caught the front corner of his car and sent him sideways off the edge, down through the terraced slope, through the low walls of a rice field and then another. The world turning and stopping and turning again until the car came to rest on its side in the shallow water of a sewa, a flooded rice paddy, the smell of mud and green rice filling the cabin as the engine died. Her name was Dewi Kartika, and she was the last person awake in the village that night. She had been checking the irrigation channels by lantern light, a task she did alone since her father's stroke had left him unable to walk the fields, when she heard the crash come down through the terraces above her. She stood still for a moment in the dark, lantern held high, listening. Then she picked up her wooden walking staff and went toward it. She was 38 years old. She walked with a limp that had been with her since childhood, a fall from a mango tree at 7 years old that had never quite healed the way the doctors in the city said it would. She had learned to walk her family's fields in a particular way, slow and deliberate, reading the ground before she committed her weight to it. This served her well that night, on the dark slope, moving toward a stranger she could not yet see. She found him half-conscious in the tilted car, water rising slowly around his ankles. She wrenched the door open with both hands and reached in and pulled him out and up the bank, the effort enormous, her legs sliding in the mud, her hands locked in his shirt. She got him onto the dry berm between the paddies and knelt beside him and checked his breathing, and when she was satisfied that it was steady, she sat back on her heels and looked at the sky and spoke a quiet thanks to no one and everyone. She could not carry him to the village alone. She could go for help, but the rice paddy berm was narrow and the slope was dark, and she did not want to leave him at the edge of the water. So she did what her mother had taught her to do when a problem was larger than one person. She broke it into pieces. She dragged him to higher ground first. Then she covered him with her batik shawl. Then she went for help, slowly, by lantern light, through the terraces she knew by heart. By midnight he was in her family's joglo, the traditional Javanese wooden house at the center of the village, wide-roofed and open-sided, its carved pillars dark with age. He was on a sleeping mat in the guest room, his head on a folded batik cloth, a mosquito net drawn around him, and Dewi was sitting cross-legged outside the net with a glass of hot ginger tea, watching him breathe. He woke to the sound of the dawn call to prayer rolling across the valley from the village mosque, and to the smell of nasi gudeg, the slow-cooked jackfruit curry that had been on the stove since before dawn, sweet and deep and spiced with coconut milk and palm sugar. He lay still and listened to the prayer and the birds beginning in the trees outside and a woman's voice speaking quietly to someone in a language he understood but could not, at that moment, connect to a name or a face or a life. When he turned his head, he found Dewi sitting at the window, looking out over the rice terraces. She heard him move and came to him with a glass of water and told him he was in Malang, in her family's house, in the village of Sumberejo. She told him she found him in the sewa. She told him the car was gone, sunk into the paddy, and that the village head had been told it was a road accident. She told him all of this plainly, and then she asked him his name. He searched for it and found nothing. She told him it would come. She said she would call him Pak Tamu, Mr. Guest, until it did. He smiled at that. The smile surprised him. She nodded as though she had been expecting it and went back to the kitchen. The days opened around him like the terraces opened around the village, layer after layer, each one revealing something new. He learned the rhythms of the house, the pre-dawn kitchen sounds, the mid-morning quiet when everyone rested from the heat, the long, slow afternoons when Dewey walked the fields and he followed at first and then, as his strength returned, walked beside her. She showed him how the irrigation worked, the ancient Subak system, water shared and divided and shared again across every family's fields. She said it had been working for 1,000 years. He said that was longer than most things he had been involved in. She said that was because it had been designed to work for everyone, not just the people at the top. He had no answer for that, which was, he was beginning to understand, one of the more honest responses available to him. Her father liked him. The old man sat on the joglo's front veranda each morning with his tea and watched the village with the patience of someone who had earned the right to sit still, and he included the stranger in this watching with a generosity that asked nothing in return. Raka, for that was the name that surfaced one morning in the middle of a conversation about irrigation, emerging quietly and without drama like something that had been waiting for the right moment. Sat with the old man in the mornings and found it the most restful part of the day. He asked Dewey one evening, as they sat on the veranda after dinner watching the fireflies come out over the paddies, what she had wanted to be before the fields became her responsibility. She thought about it for a long time, the way she thought about everything seriously, without rushing, as though the question deserved her full attention. Then she said, an architect. She had been accepted to a university in Surabaya. Her father's stroke had come 2 weeks before she was due to leave. She had stayed. She said this without bitterness, which was the thing that moved him most about it. He said he was sorry. She said, don't be. She said, every field I walk, I am building something. It is just that the building is made of water and rice and time instead of concrete. He looked at her in the firefly light and thought that he had sat in boardrooms with some of the most educated people in the country and had never once heard anything that clear. One night there was a Wayang Kulit performance in the village square, shadow puppets against a lit screen, the Dalang performing a story from the Mahabharata that went from 9 in the evening until nearly dawn. Dewey brought him, and they sat on mats with the rest of the village and watched the shadows move, and she leaned close to translate the parts he struggled to follow, her voice low and warm against the sound of the gamelan. He did not always watch the screen. He watched her face instead, lit from the side by the Wayang lamp, entirely absorbed, entirely herself, and he thought, I have been to many places. This is the first one I have not wanted to leave. He told her that later, walking back through the dark terraces. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, places are easy to love. It is the people in them that are harder. He asked her what she meant. She said, you love this place because it is safe and slow and it has given you time to breathe. She said, but you have a life somewhere, Pak Tamu. Even if you cannot remember it yet, it is waiting for you. And when it calls you back, it will call louder than the fields. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. He had learned in 13 days not to argue with her about things she turned out to be right about. The memory returned on the 14th morning, during the walk to the upper terrace, between one step and the next. Raka Wijaya, founder of Wijaya Group. 45 years old. He remembered the consortium that had been moving against him, the rival who had financed the truck, the emergency board meeting that had been called in his absence. He remembered his life with the totality of someone who has been unconscious of it and wakes to find it larger and more demanding than he had left it. He stopped walking. He stood on the berm between two flooded paddies with the green valley spread below him and the morning mist still in the lower terraces, and he stood there for a long time. When he turned back, Dewi was watching him from 3 steps behind. She had seen his face change. She knew. The cars came before noon. 3 of them, black and city clean and absurdly out of place on the village road, raising dust past the warung and the mosque and the children who stopped to stare. His security team, who had spent 14 days retracing routes and following leads, and had finally located him through a hospital inquiry about an unknown man with a head injury in Malang. They came through the joglo's gate with the certainty of people who have been searching for a long time and are not inclined to slow down now that they have found what they were looking for. Dewi was in the kitchen. She heard the cars. She dried her hands on a cloth and came out and saw the men in suits and the look on his face, the look of a man who has remembered everything and is already being asked to become it again, and she understood everything in the space of a breath. She stood in the doorway of the joglo with her hands folded and her face very still. He came to her. He crossed the courtyard and stood close and spoke in a low voice. He said, "I remember." He said, "I know who I am." He said, "I am not leaving because I want to." She looked up at him with her calm, dark eyes and said, "I know." He said her name, Dewi, and the way he said it made it sound like a word in a language he had just learned and already could not imagine not knowing. He put his hand against hers for a moment. She turned her palm and held it briefly and then let go. She said, very quietly, "Pulang, go home." He said, "This feels more like home than anywhere I have been." She said, "Then carry it with you. That is what home is for." Then he was in the car. Then the village road was behind him. Then the city was ahead of him, and the helicopter, and the board meeting, and the life that had been running without him for 14 days and needed him back. Dewi stood in the joglo's gateway until the dust from the cars had settled. Then she went back to the kitchen and finished the nasi gudeg and served lunch to her father and did not say anything about the morning. After lunch, she walked the upper terraces alone, slowly, the way she always did, reading the water and the soil and the slow progress of the rice. The terraces were as they always were. Green, patient, indifferent to what had passed through them and unable to be hurried. She was grateful for that. She told herself the sensible things. She told herself she had known. She told herself she was a practical woman from a practical family who understood that the world had people in different places and that those places had different demands. She told herself many things on the walk back down through the terraces, and she believed all of them, approximately, except for the one about being entirely fine. In Jakarta, they moved him through the aftermath with the speed that crises in the corporate world always demanded. The rival's move was documented and legally challenged. The man who had arranged the truck was identified. Proceedings were set in motion. The board was stabilized. His company, which had wobbled without him, was steadied and then directed forward. He did all of this with the full force of who he was and the underlying awareness, constant and unshakable, that the most important thing he had done in the past year had happened in a village he could find on a map, but could not adequately explain to anyone who had not been there. He could not contact her. Not while the investigation was active. Not while the men who had arranged the truck still had allies who might trace any contact back to her. So he was careful and patient and indirect, the way he had learned in 14 days that careful people could be. The Subak irrigation system in Sumbarejo received a restoration grant from a foundation that did not advertise its donors. The medical specialist in Jakarta who had told Dewi's father 2 years ago that his post-stroke rehabilitation had reached its limit received a referral to a new program that had recently and quietly become available. The university in Surabaya, whose architecture faculty had once offered a place to a girl from Sumbarejo who had never arrived, received an anonymous endowment for a distance learning program available to rural students, fully funded. She did not know it was him. She suspected. She sat on the veranda with her father in the evenings and watched the fireflies over the paddies and let herself suspect without confirming, because confirming would have meant hoping, and hoping would have meant waiting, and she was not a woman who was made for waiting. She was made for building. So she built. He kept a small jar of soil from the Suwa berm on his desk in Jakarta, red Javanese earth, dried now, the color of old terracotta. His assistant had asked about it once. He said it was from a project site. He did not say which one. He did not say that sometimes, when the 43rd floor view of Jakarta felt like a place that had nothing to do with anything real. He put his hand around the jar and felt the weight of it and remembered the smell of rain on rice fields and a woman's voice translating ancient stories in the dark by firefly light. He remembered what she had said, "Carry it with you. That is what home is for." He was carrying it. One valley, one Suwa, one woman who broke a problem into pieces and solved each one in the dark, by lantern light alone. She had pulled him from the water when the water was rising. And from a tower above the Jakarta skyline, he was making sure, quietly, carefully, one thing at a time, that the water would always be there for her fields. End of script.